What if I told you some spirits never left their graves, and tonight they might be watching you? If you love ghost stories, hit subscribe, tap like, and share this video so we can bring you even more terrifying tales. Subscribe, like, share to keep the ghosts coming.
In the stillness of old Japan, long before electric lights disturbed the velvet black of night, there stood a village that breathed through the rhythm of the sea. The air smelled of salt and cedar, of incense and rain. Fishermen rose before dawn to whisper prayers to the gods of wind and wave, while farmers bowed toward the mountains where spirits were said to dwell unseen among the trees. It was a place suspended between the divine and the ordinary, a thin veil where both worlds seemed to listen to one another. And in this village, beneath the constant shroud of mist, lived a man named Kiyoharu Takeda. He was not a fisherman, nor a monk, but an artisan, a carver of dolls and idols, known throughout Shizuoka for his uncanny precision. His hands were small but strong, veins like rivers beneath his pale skin, and his eyes burned with the patience of someone who saw more than wood and paint. To him, every block of hinoki, cedar, or camphor would held a breath, a waiting spirit that begs to be released. He worked in silence, never taking apprentices, never selling his work in the markets. When he carved, the world disappeared. His tools became extensions of his fingers, and each strike of the blade was a heartbeat. The villagers whispered that his dolls blinked when no one watched, that sometimes, when the wind passed through his workshop at night, faint laughter could be heard, not from Kiyoharu, but from the dolls themselves. Despite these rumors, people respected him. They came from distant provinces to purchase his small statues of Jizo and Kannon, believing his creations brought good fortune. But one day Kiyoharu received a commission unlike any other, one that would become the beginning of a legend darker than anyone could imagine. It was the 7th year of the Meiji era, 1874, when a wealthy merchant named Nakajima visited Kiyoharu's workshop. The merchant bowed deeply, his silk robes whispering as he spoke. "Master Takeda," he said, "I wish to commission a statue of Fukurokuju, the god of longevity and wisdom, for my family's shrine. My wife has fallen ill, and I believe his blessing may restore her strength." Kiyoharu listened, his expression unreadable. He had carved the likeness of many gods before, but Fukurokuju, that name stirred something ancient within him. Fukurokuju was not merely a god of luck. He was a being who walked the line between the human and the divine, once mortal. Some said, and so close to man's desires, that his image carried both blessing and danger. "I will carve him," Kiyoharu replied quietly, "but the work must not be hurried, for a god such as Fukurokuju demands patience beyond time." The merchant agreed, leaving gold coins and a small scroll of blessings on the table. Kiyo bowed, then locked the door behind him, as if sealing himself inside with his promise. From that day forward, he vanished from the world. His neighbors saw no smoke from his chimney, no lantern light at night. They heard the faint rhythm of his chisel at odd hours, day and night, blending together into one endless act of devotion. Some said he had stopped eating, surviving only on tea and prayer. Others whispered that he was speaking to the wood itself. Weeks turned to months. When winter came, the first snow blanketed the village, and Kiyoharu's wife was seen walking to the shrine each morning with offerings, rice, sake, incense. She looked thinner, her face drawn with worry. Then, one morning, she stopped coming altogether. No one saw her again. It was spring when the door to Kiyoharu's workshop finally creaked open. The villagers gathered, half curious, half afraid. The air that drifted out smelled of sandalwood and decay. Inside, Kiyoharu stood beside his masterpiece, a doll nearly as tall as a child, clothed in crimson silk with golden embroidery, its eyes gleaming with inhuman vitality. "This," he whispered, "is Fukurokuju reborn." The villagers gasped. The doll's face was serene, its forehead high and smooth, its smile faint but alive. It seemed to look at everyone and no one at once. Its hands were clasped as though in silent prayer. The craftsmanship was divine, too divine, but Kiyoharu looked ill. His hair had turned completely white, his skin translucent as parchment. His fingers trembled as he brushed dust from the doll's robe. When a young monk from the nearby temple stepped forward to praise the work, Kiyoharu simply said, "He spoke to me as I carved. He asked for completion. Now that it is done, I am nothing more than his shadow." The villagers thought it was madness, the exhaustion of isolation, but later that night, they saw something they could never explain. From the window of the workshop, a faint light glowed, moving slowly, as if a lantern floated by unseen hands. Then, a whisper carried through the wind, a man's voice murmuring in reverence, answered by another voice, soft and echoing, not human at all. The next morning, Kiyoharu was found slumped over his workbench, his hands clutching his carving tools. His eyes were open, staring straight at the doll. A faint smile curved his lips. He was dead. The villagers buried him on the hillside overlooking the sea. The Fukurokuju doll was taken to the local temple, as his final wish had requested. The monks placed it near the altar, offering prayers for its sanctity. For a while, peace returned, but the villagers said the air in the temple had changed, heavier, quieter, almost reverent in a way that frightened them. Offerings left before the doll would vanish by morning. Candles burned down twice as fast when lit in its presence. One monk swore that the doll's expression had shifted slightly after Kiyoharu's funeral. Its smile seemed deeper, more knowing. At first, these were dismissed as tricks of light and imagination. But one night, a young novice named Satoshi stayed late to clean the altar. The moonlight spilled across the floor in silver ribbons as he swept, humming softly to himself. When he turned to the doll, he froze. Its head was tilted, just slightly. He stared, heart pounding. The air grew cold. The temple bells outside gave a single soft chime, though there was no wind. He blinked, and the head was straight again. He ran from the temple, screaming. The abbot scolded him the next morning, insisting exhaustion had clouded his senses. But that night, another monk, older and wiser, stayed behind to prove the temple was safe. His name was Hagen. He had lived there since childhood, and nothing, not even tales of restless spirits, frightened him. Yet, as he chanted before the altar, the room grew dim. The candle flames bent sideways, flickering violently. The shadows on the wall twisted, forming shapes that did not belong to any human outline. Then he heard it, a faint tapping sound, like knuckles against wood. Tap, 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 tap. It came from the direction of the doll. He tried to ignore it, continuing his sutras, but the tapping grew louder, more insistent, like someone trapped inside a coffin. Hogan's voice faltered. When he finally dared to look, he saw the doll's hand had moved. It now rested on the floor beside it, fingers splayed as though it had reached out. He dropped his prayer beads and stumbled backward. The candles went out. In the darkness, he felt something brush against his sleeve, smooth, cold, and deliberate. He whispered a prayer and fled into the night. From that night on, no monk would stay in the main hall after sunset. The abbot ordered the doll to be enclosed within a glass case, sealed with charms and sutras. The disturbances lessened, but never fully stopped. Sometimes, during festivals, the temple bells rang by themselves. Sometimes, a visitor would swear they heard faint breathing near the case, and sometimes, the doll's reflection in the glass would not match its posture. Years turned into decades. The world outside changed. Electricity came. Trains roared across the land. The old ways gave way to the new, but the Fukurokuju doll remained. Its robes faded to dull scarlet, its eyes dimmed slightly, yet it never decayed, not even dust settled upon it. Then, in 1933, the great earthquake struck. The temple shook, walls cracked, the glass case shattered. Amid the ruins, the monks found the doll standing upright, unbroken, untouched by falling beams. One monk reached to pick it up and screamed. His hand blistered instantly, as though burned by invisible fire. They buried the shards of glass and sealed the doll again, this time within a small chamber. None dared enter without ritual purification, but word spread quickly of the unburned idol, of the curse that guarded it. Curious visitors began to come from nearby towns, eager to see the living god. Some said they felt nothing, others left pale and trembling. A few, the boldest, claimed to see faces reflected in the doll's eyes, faces not their own. By the time World War II came, the temple had fallen silent. The monks evacuated as bombings neared, but when they returned years later, they found the hall untouched, though all around it lay ruins. The doll was still there, standing in the same place, as if waiting, and from that point on, every abbot who tried to move it met an early death. The locals began calling it the spirit of the god who would not rest. Children dared each other to visit the temple at night. Travelers left offerings for safe passage. A new legend was born. carried by the wind and the fearful whisper of priests, the legend of the haunted Fukurokuju Ghost. Yet, the story was far from over, because decades later, long after the last monk who had known the truth had passed away, the temple was rediscovered by a young researcher, a man who believed in science, not spirits. And when he set foot inside, the air changed once again. The whisper awoke, the god remembered, and the doll opened its eyes.
When the researcher arrived, the temple looked like a remnant of another world. The forest had reclaimed the path, vines coiling over cracked stone lanterns, and moss draped the ancient Toria gate like green velvet. The air was unnaturally still, thick with that strange silence that seems to hum just beneath hearing the silence of a place long abandoned, but never truly empty. His name was Dr. Ren Ishida, an anthropologist from Tokyo University. He specialized in cultural mythology, superstitions, haunted artifacts, forgotten rituals, yet he never believed in ghosts. To him, fear was a language of the human mind, not the language of spirits. He had heard of the Fukurokuju doll in passing, a relic whispered about by monks, catalogued as item for 7KYH, noted for spiritual significance and unexplained phenomena. Most scholars dismissed it as rural folklore, a curiosity of local faith. But Ren was different. He wanted to understand why people continued to fear it, even after a century of silence. He came alone. It was autumn when he arrived, the kind of season where every breath carried a faint chill, and fallen leaves whispered across the path like small, secret voices. The temple grounds were overgrown, the old bell tower half collapsed, crows perched on the roof, their black eyes watching as he approached. Inside, the air was stale and cool. The scent of incense still lingered, faint but undeniable, as though someone had lit it only days ago. Dust motes floated like pale fireflies in the shafts of sunlight that pierced through the broken roof. Ren set down his equipment, a camera, a sound recorder, and a small field journal. He began to document everything, noting the architecture, the carvings on the walls, the inscriptions near the altar. Then he saw it. The Fukurokuju doll. It stood in the center of a small, glass-walled chamber at the far end of the main hall. The glass was newer than the temple itself, sealed by thick wooden frames carved with sutras. The doll was smaller than he expected, perhaps 2 feet tall, dressed in faded red and gold. Its wooden skin smooth and pale like aged ivory. Its eyes, though dulled by time, still caught the light in a way that made them shimmer faintly, as though wet. He wrote in his notes, "Impression, craftsmanship, extraordinary. Expression serene but strangely conscious. Proportions resemble classical Edo-style religious dolls. Yet the facial detail suggests individual human modeling, perhaps based on the sculptor himself." He circled the case slowly, recording the details. The silence seemed to deepen the longer he stayed. A faint ringing in his ears began to pulse, or was it the echo of a faraway bell? He dismissed it as altitude pressure. By evening, he set up his camp inside the hall. He wanted to stay overnight, to observe environmental changes. As the sun sank behind the trees, the temple dimmed into a palette of blue shadows. The only light came from his lantern and the faint glow of the doll's reflection in the glass. He began to speak into his recorder. Observation: 9:47 p.m. The temple atmosphere grows noticeably denser after sunset. No wind. Sound appears muted, as though the air absorbs vibration. The doll remains stationary. I perceive a slight optical distortion, perhaps due to refraction on the glass surface. He paused, frowning. A soft sound, almost like a sigh, rippled through the room. Ren turned off the recorder and listened. Nothing, just the distant cry of an owl. He exhaled, shaking his head, and resumed writing. At midnight, his lantern flickered. The temperature dropped. His breath misted faintly in the air. The forest outside seemed to fade away into a deeper quiet, that kind of quiet which feels alive. Listening. Ren stood and approached the glass case. His reflection looked back at him, tired, pale, slightly distorted by the curvature of the pane. The doll's eyes glinted faintly. He lifted his camera and took a photograph. The flash burst, lighting up the hall for a split second. When the light faded, Ren blinked. Something had changed. The doll's head, it was facing him now. He froze. He had been certain it had faced slightly left before. He checked the old photos from earlier. Yes, in the daylight it had indeed been turned toward the altar. Now it stared directly into his lens. He laughed nervously, blaming the low light and exhaustion. Still, He could not resist stepping closer. That was when he noticed it. The faintest trace of dust disturbed near the doll's feet. Inside the sealed glass case, he stared at it for a long time, then turned away, convincing himself it was nothing more than vibration from his steps. But when he lay down on his mat, sleep did not come easy. The forest whispered outside, and every creak of wood sounded like breath at some hour between night and dawn. Ren dreamed out he stood in a vast white room filled with hundreds of identical dolls, each carved in the likeness of Fukurokuju, each with the same long forehead, the same serene smile. Yet their eyes were hollow, empty sockets dripping black ink. A shadow moved among them, tall and thin, carrying a chisel in its hand. It stopped in front of Ren and whispered in a voice like wind through dead leaves. "Do you know the price of wisdom?" Ren awoke with a start. His lantern had gone out. The recorder beside him clicked softly. It was still running. He played it back. Static, faint breathing, then tap, tap, tap. A soft sound, like wood striking wood, echoed 3 times. Ren sat frozen. The tapping had come from inside the glass chamber. He forced himself to check. The doll was exactly as before, standing still, eyes forward, hands folded. But on the floor beneath it, the layer of dust showed a single line drawn through it, as though something had been dragged across the surface. He took another photo, trying to steady his shaking hands. Then he packed his notes and decided to rest outside the temple until morning. He could analyze the data later, under sunlight. But as he stepped through the sliding door, he saw movement at the edge of his vision. The faint outline of a figure standing between the pillars. A man, thin and bent, with long white hair. Ren turned sharply. Nothing, only darkness. The next morning, he found faint footprints in the dust where no one should have walked. In the following days, Ren grew increasingly obsessed. He could not explain what he had recorded: the tapping, the whisper, the shift in the doll's position. He stayed longer each night, determined to capture evidence. By the 4th day, he noticed changes in himself. His dreams became more vivid, more invasive. He saw the doll everywhere, in the reflection of water, in the glass of his phone, even in the curve of shadows on his notebook. Its expression had begun to seep into his thoughts. He began to talk to it at first, half-jokingly. "You've been here a long time, haven't you?" he murmured one night. "Tell me your story." The air seemed to grow heavier, as though listening. He spoke again. "Did your creator bind you with something?" A faint creak echoed from the case. Ren swallowed hard. "If there's truth in you, show me." Silence. Then, a single whisper, soft and fleeting, almost too faint to be real. Kiyoharu. Ren's heart pounded. That name, the sculptor's name. He played it back on his recorder. Yes, it was there, buried beneath the static, unmistakable. A voice not his own. That night, the dreams returned stronger. He found himself standing in Kiyoharu's old workshop, the smell of wood and oil thick in the air. The craftsman worked feverishly at his bench, carving with desperate speed. His hands bled, the tools slipping as he muttered incantations under his breath. Ren stepped closer, and Kiyoharu turned to face him. His eyes were hollow, his mouth twisted into a smile of devotion and despair. "You cannot carve the divine," he said softly. "You can only invite it." Ren awoke, screaming. The days that followed blurred into one long, waking nightmare. His camera began to malfunction. Each new photograph showed faint distortions. The doll's mouth opened slightly wider, its eyes darker, its robes rippling as though in motion. The sound recorder captured low murmurs that grew louder with each session, forming syllables he could almost recognize, fragments of sutras and something older, the language of the mountain spirits. Ren began to understand that what lived inside the doll was not merely a ghost. It was a consciousness born from centuries of faith, fear, and fixation, a god twisted by the hunger of human worship. He found the original temple records, buried beneath rotting scrolls. One entry, dated 1874, written by Abbot Hagen, read the sculptor's eyes bled as he completed the carving. He claimed the god spoke through him. The air turned bitter. "I fear what we have accepted into our hall." Below it, another hand had added, "The doll should not be prayed to. It should be feared." Ren's rationality began to crumble. He stopped eating. His reflection grew gaunt, his eyes sunken. He started hearing tapping sounds even when he was far from the temple, in his car, in his hotel, in his dreams. Then came the night that marked the point of no return. He set up multiple cameras around the glass case, determined to film what moved it. He stayed awake with strong tea, eyes fixed on the doll. Hours passed. The candles flickered lower. Midnight came. Tap, tap, tap.
The sound began again, this time louder. Ren's pulse quickened. He turned the camera toward the doll, and then movement. The doll's hand, smooth and pale, lifted from its lap. Slowly, deliberately, it pressed against the inside of the glass. The faint sound of wood scraping echoed through the hole. Ren stumbled backward, his breath catching. He could see condensation forming on the glass, where its fingers touched, as though something living breathed inside. Then, in the reflection of the glass, he saw it, not the doll's face, but a man's. Kuharu standing behind him, whispering. Ren turned, and the hole was empty. The camera fell from his hands. Later, when he watched the footage, he saw only himself standing motionless for hours, staring into the glass, unmoving, while the doll's head tilted ever so slightly toward him, inch by inch. Outside the temple, villagers began to speak again of strange happenings, the bell ringing at odd hours, birds dying on the steps, lights flickering from within though no one lived there, and Ren Ishida, the rational man, the man of science, stopped responding to calls. When a search party arrived days later, they found his camp abandoned. His notebook lay open beside the doll's glass chamber, pages filled with drawings of eyes, hundreds of them, all staring. The doll stood, as it always had, hands folded, expression calm. Only one thing was different. In the thin layer of dust, beneath its feet were footprints, small, human, leading away from the glass, and ending abruptly halfway across the hole, as though someone had walked out of the case and vanished. The Fukurokuju doll's legend grew anew. Monks returned to seal the hole, placing layers of charms and sutras along the doors. They said the air inside was alive, that anyone who lingered too long began to hear whispers calling their name. But among Ren's recovered recordings, one final entry remained, dated the night before he disappeared. His voice trembled, distant, almost reverent. Observation, 3:03 a.m. The doll is no longer imitating life. It remembers it. I believe the boundary between faith and creation has collapsed. If you are hearing this, do not look into its eyes. It sees through you. It sees what you believe, and belief is how it survives. The tape ended there, but some say that on quiet nights, when the wind passes through the old forest of Shizuoka, you can still hear a faint tapping sound carried on the air. 3 slow knocks, like a god's patient hand, asking once more to be let out.
By the time Ayako reached the remote shrine of Fukurokuju, dawn was dissolving into a bruised sky, streaks of violet and amber bleeding into one another, like the merging of two worlds, mortal and beyond. Her breath came in shallow bursts, her hands trembled against the steering wheel, and the doll, wrapped in a white cloth and tied with red string, rested on the passenger seat beside her, like a sleeping serpent waiting to awaken. The mountain road, coiled upward like the spine of a dragon, mist clinging to the pines and curling across the windshield, as though unseen fingers were tracing symbols of warning. Each turn felt narrower than the last. The air was too still, too silent, not even the birds dared to sing. When she finally arrived at the shrine, a wave of nausea rolled through her. The air itself felt wrong. It smelled of rain and incense and something older, something faintly metallic, like dried blood on sacred wood. The shrine stood in ruins, consumed by years of abandonment. Wooden beams tilted precariously, and the once bright Toria gate was mottled with lichen and blackened from an old fire. But at the center of it all, a small altar still stood, covered in offerings left by those who still believed in the deity of luck and longevity, the god whose benevolence had long since decayed into something else entirely. Ayako stepped out of the car, her every movement echoing through the silent valley. She felt the air tighten as if invisible eyes were watching her. Her phone had long since lost its signal. She was utterly alone, or rather, utterly not alone. The moment she crossed the threshold of the Torie, a whisper slid through the mist. It wasn't a word, not at first, more a sigh, a flutter of memory carried on the wind. Then, slowly, it began to take form. Return, what was promised. She froze. The voice seemed to come from within her skull, behind her ears, a thought that didn't belong to her. Her pulse hammered against her ribs. She forced her feet forward, clutching the doll like a priest holds a relic, and approached the altar. The wrapping around the doll pulsed faintly, as if something beneath it was breathing. She wanted to scream but found she couldn't. Instead, she knelt and began to untie the red string, her hands trembling. When the final knot came loose, the wind died completely. The silence was so deep it pressed against her ear. She peeled away the cloth, revealing the doll's face, but it wasn't as she remembered. The once benign expression had changed. Its wooden lips were parted in a faint smirk, and its eyes, those glossy black eyes, now seemed deeper, like holes leading into endless night. A faint trail of crimson streaked from one corner of its mouth, as though it had been feeding on something unseen. And then, the doll moved. It was small, barely the size of a child's head, yet when it turned its head toward her, the motion was slow, deliberate, aware. Its mouth opened wider, the carved wood creaking, and from within came a sound, not a scream, not a word, but a wet, guttural whisper. "I remember you." Ayako stumbled backward, clutching her chest. No, you can't," she gasped, but the voice continued, overlapping with others, male, female, childlike, all whispering in chorus. "You took me from my shrine. You woke me. You wear my name." The air rippled with heat. The incense sticks in the corner of the altar spontaneously ignited, their smoke curling upward into grotesque shapes, faces twisting, laughing, crying. Ayako fell to her knees. "I didn't know," she pleaded. "I didn't mean to. All mortals say the same," the voices hissed. "But you knew enough to touch what should have stayed untouched." The ground began to tremble. From beneath the shrine, something vast stirred, a sound like deep thunder rolling through the bones of the earth. The wooden beams groaned as though bending beneath invisible pressure. Ayako tried to run, but the roots of nearby trees had begun to shift, snaking across the ground like living veins. They wrapped around her ankles, pulling her back toward the altar. The doll rose from where she had placed it, levitating, twisting slowly in the air, its hair unfurling as though alive. It floated toward her until it hovered inches from her face. "Do you know why Fukurokuju was loved?" it whispered. "Because he'd granted life where death should have been. But every gift has a price. Every wish leaves a scar." Images flashed across Ayako's mind, memories not her own. A temple in the Edo period, a monk carving the first Fukurokuju doll by lamplight. His hands bled as he worked, and each drop of blood soaked into the wood. The doll's eyes were made from the black stones found near burial grounds. It was meant to embody fortune, but something else had slipped in the lingering spirit of a forgotten child, a remnant of sorrow too deep to fade. The doll was not a gift from the gods. It was an offering to them, a vessel to contain what humans could not bear. Ayako screamed as her vision snapped back to the present. The doll's eyes now glowed faintly, and behind it, the air shimmered, a human-shaped silhouette materializing in the mist. He was tall, impossibly thin, with elongated earlobes and a smile that stretched too far. His skin glowed faintly, his eyes sunken yet burning with an inner fire. He was dressed in ceremonial robes that fluttered without wind. "You sought fortune," he said, his voice echoing with layers of ages. "You found memory." Ayako could not breathe. She realized she was staring into the face of Fukurokuju, or what had become of him. Not the gentle deity of wisdom, but the distorted echo of belief itself, swollen and corrupted by centuries of misplaced devotion. He extended his skeletal hand toward her. "Every age forgets what it owes. Every soul feeds the one that remembers. You will stay." Ayako tried to resist, but the roots tightened round her body, pinning her to the earth. She screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the mist. The doll floated closer and pressed its wooden forehead against hers. For a moment, she saw everything, the countless lives touched by the curse, the families destroyed, the temples burned to cleanse the unclean spirit, and always, the doll surviving, passed from one set of trembling hands to another, feeding quietly on their fears. She felt herself slipping. The cold crept into her bones. The last thing she heard was Fukurokuju's whisper. "Now you will never age. You will never forget. You will live as I live, between the breath and the shadow." And then nothing. When the villagers found the shrine a week later, it was gone. Only the torii gate remained, half buried in ash and soot. They found Ayako's car at the base of the mountain, empty, with a single object resting on the seat, the Fukurokuju doll, its expression serene, as if nothing had ever happened. But those who looked too long into its eyes claimed to hear something faint, the echo of a woman's voice calling from very far away. Trapped in endless whispering prayer, the shrine was sealed once more, and officials declared it a restricted area due to unstable ground. But locals still tell the story in hushed tones about the woman who sought to uncover the truth and instead became part of it. And sometimes, on misty nights, they say a figure can be seen standing at the base of the mountain, her face pale, her hands folded in reverence, her eyes glassy as porcelain, holding a small doll that smiles with both joy and hunger. When the world forgot her name, the mountain did not. For mountains in Japan are old things, older than gods, older than prayers, older even than the wind. They remember every whisper, every cry, every promise broken in their shadow. And this mountain, now cursed by the Fukurokuju doll, became a keeper of silence. Years passed. The story of Ayako Takamura faded into local superstition. Her apartment was emptied by her relatives, her name recorded as missing, presumed dead. The news ran a short report, then moved on to fresher tragedies. Only a few online forums kept her memory alive, scattered with grainy photos and conspiracy threads titled The Cursed Fukurokuju Shrine. What really happened? It was there, buried beneath endless scrolls of urban legends, that a man named Kenji Ito found her story. Kenji was a documentarian, or at least he had been. Before his career dissolved into obscurity, he'd once been known for exposing fraudulent psychics and haunted sites. But he'd gone too far once, debunking a powerful medium whose followers didn't forgive Isaac. His name became synonymous with skepticism. No network wanted him anymore. But Kenji had one weakness: curiosity that bordered on obsession. And so, when he stumbled upon the account of the Fukurokuju doll, he saw in it a chance for redemption, a story that might restore his name, or at least his sanity. He arrived in Gifu Prefecture in the autumn of 2023, carrying nothing but a camera, a drone, and an old journal he'd found online, a scanned version of Ayako Takamura's field notes, supposedly recovered from her university office. The air that season carried a strange stillness. Locals refused to speak of the mountain directly. When Kenji mentioned Fukurokuju, shopkeepers would lower their eyes and mutter prayers. One old monk warned him, "Do not climb the mountain after sunset. The air is wrong there." It remembers, Kenji laughed it off. But that night, as he reviewed Ayako's journal, he began to feel the first whisper of unease. Her final entry was written in erratic script, barely legible. "He comes in dreams now." The doll's eyes followed. "I hear the whisper. Every wish leaves a scar." The next morning, Kenji began the climb. The forest grew denser as he ascended, trees bent and twisted by centuries of wind. The sunlight barely reached the ground, filtered through layers of mist. At times, he thought he heard footsteps behind him, soft, deliberate, perfectly matching his own rhythm. When he stopped, so did they. By noon, he found the Torii Gate. It was blackened and cracked, half swallowed by moss, and beyond it, the remnants of the old shrine lay scattered like bones, broken beams, charred prayer plaques, fragments of porcelain faces buried in the soil. He knelt beside one, brushing off the dirt. It was a fragment of a doll's face, perhaps from another offering, but the eyes, painted black with faint red flecks, seemed almost alive, as the sun began to dip behind the ridges. Kenji decided to set up his camera. He began speaking into the lens, his voice steady at first. "This is Kenji Ito. October 18th, 2023. I am documenting what remains of the Fukurokuju Shrine. Local legends claim a cursed doll resides here, one believed to house the spirit of a corrupted deity. Eyewitness reports describe." He froze. Behind him, the faintest sound, a soft clatter, like wood knocking against stone. He turned slowly. At the center of the ruined altar sat a small shape wrapped in white cloth, tied with a crimson string. He hadn't placed it there. His heart thudded painfully. The fabric stirred, as if caught by wind, though the air was utterly still. Kenji took a step closer, then stopped. His breath came shallow. The red string twitched. Once, then again. He raised his camera, whispering, "Is someone here?" Nothing. Then, the cloth slipped away, revealing the face beneath. It was perfect, untouched by decay. The Fukurokuju doll. Kenji stared. The craftsmanship was immaculate, ancient yet pristine, its lacquered skin gleaming faintly under the dying light. But the eyes, gods, the eyes reflected movement that wasn't there, a flickering shadow behind the glassy black. He reached out, drawn by an invisible gravity. The moment his fingers brushed the doll's cheek, the world exhaled. The forest darkened in an instant, as if night had fallen all at once. The trees around him began to hum, a low, vibrating drone that seemed to come from the roots themselves. His camera screen glitched, flickered, then filled with static. And then the whisper, "Return what was promised." Kenji stumbled back. "Who's there?" he shouted. The voice came from everywhere, from within the ground, from the air, from inside his own chest. Every gift must be paid for. His head spun. He saw flashes, visions like photographs burned into his mind. A monk's hands carving wood by lamplight, blood dripping onto cedar, the doll's eyes opening for the first time. Then Ayako, kneeling in terror, the doll hovering before her, her mouth open in a scream that made no sound. And then silence again. Kenji blinked. He was still in the shrine. The doll was gone. Only the faint outline of its body remained on the dusty altar. He turned toward his camera and froze. Through the viewfinder, he saw himself, but something was wrong. The figure on screen wasn't moving in sync with him. Its head tilted slowly, unnaturally, its mouth twitching into a smile that wasn't his own. The static deepened, turning into a sound like distorted laughter. Then the lens cracked from the inside. Kenji ran. Branches tore at his jacket as he stumbled down the path, the forest closing in like a living thing. Every breath burned. Behind him, footsteps followed, light, deliberate, and growing faster. He didn't dare look back. When he finally reached his car, he collapsed into the driver's seat, fumbling with the keys. He glanced up, and there it was, in the passenger seat. The doll, its face serene, lips curved in the faintest smile. A single drop of blood ran from the corner of its mouth. Kenji screamed and drove down the winding path, through the fog, never daring to glance beside him. But with every turn, the doll's reflection appeared in the mirror, in the glass, in the corner of his vision, until he no longer knew which world he was in. The next morning, the villagers found his car parked near the Torii gate again, empty, the camera still recording. The footage was later leaked online. It showed Kenji entering the shrine, speaking clearly until the moment he touched the doll. After that, the image fractured, showing flashes of dozens of faces. The monk, strangers, all overlapping, whispering the same words, "You wear his name now." And in the final frame, just before the battery died, the camera panned upward to show a shape carved into the shrine wall, a single symbol painted in fresh red, Sho Kotobuki, the sign of longevity, the symbol of Fukurokuju. No one knows who drew it. Today, hikers sometimes report seeing an old man in ceremonial robes standing beneath the Torii gate, offering them a doll for protection. Those who take it home claim to dream of Ayako and Kenji, calling to them from a place filled with fog and laughter. And in every case, the doll disappears within 7 days, only to reappear at the mountain shrine, waiting, patient as stone. No one remembers when the Fukurokuju shrine was first built. No one remembers who carved the first doll. But the mountain remembers, and it whispers still. To anyone foolish enough to listen, every wish leaves a scar.